A surprise appearance there from the president at a women's event there. He had a number of women cabinet members up there on stage with him. He pointed out, once again, how he's been, and fairly, by the way, he's right to say this. He pointed out how unfairly he has been treated in the mainstream media. You got a market that's at record highs. You got GDP growth, better than 3%. You got thousands of companies saying, we're going to up wages or we're going to give bonuses this year. And yet none of that gets reported on. Joining me right now, Dan Gainor from the Media Research Center and Belpointe Asset Management Chief Strategist David Nelson. Before I go to the media side of this, let's talk about reality, okay? David Nelson, you're here for that because Sure. What is the reality of what we're living in? If we say, okay, we're going to ignore the vulgar language that others have been talking about nonstop, including Cory Booker. You may have seen that soundbite earlier on. And we're going to focus on what's actually happening in Sure. the country right now. Where are we?
Look, this goes way beyond tax reform, and I understand why some of the media wants to divert the attention away from that. Because what you're seeing right now is actually translating into the real economy. It's not just about the stock market. It's not just about stocks going higher. CEOs don't raise wages unless they have a lot of confidence in what's going on. And they're looking 3, 4, even 5 years out. They're not doing that because it's a short-term blip in their business, because you can't roll those wages back once you raise them. So that's really good news. And some of the data points that don't get focused on, we focus on 26,000, 25,000. What about the NFIB Small Business Optimism Index? That's really an important index. That shows what much of mainstream America is actually seeing right now. So I think it's good news. I think it's great that the market's been higher, but I think how it translates into the real economy and what it means in the years going out, that's what really matters here.
I mean, fundamentals, right? Fundamentals. And I'll tell you, voters vote their pocketbook. They really do. And if the economy's doing well and the market's doing great and wages are going up, well, that puts the left in a rather bad position, because that whole let's redistribute everybody's wealth thing may not work as well as real capitalism. Dan Gainor joins me right now. Dan, you know, ABC News the other night on their flagship newscast, do you know that they didn't do even 5 seconds on the Walmart bonuses? Or on the wage increases at one? They didn't even bother. They just talked about, well, the word that everybody's talking about. Why is that?
Because they don't want to tell the positive stories. Because if they tell the positive stories, then their whole year-long war against Trump goes out the window. I mean, our analysis is just so tedious because there's been almost 100 hours of Trump. 1/3 of the stories on the evening news shows were about Trump. 90% were negative. Yeah. It doesn't matter what topic, overwhelmingly negative. They want to talk about Russia even though nothing's been proved a year into it. At some point in time, if this were an investigation into Democrats, they'd be telling everybody time for it to go away. But they don't want to talk about that. What Trump just said, the enthusiasm he had, the positive news, that the unemployment rate for women, the unemployment rate for African Americans, the GDP, all of the good news for business, and which means good news for workers. And the media are going out of their way to not tell that story.
Do you think, though, that everyday Americans know better, David? I mean, and look, you know, you didn't send him to the White House to be your preacher, right? You sent him to help preacher, the country yes. and get a job done. And so far, the metrics are on his side. So do you think Americans understand that? Or do you think they're buying into what we hear out of the mainstream media?
They will slowly understand it. It doesn't happen right away. But you hit on an important point. The dynamic is going to change as we head into next year, especially as we get closer and closer to the election cycle. If you're looking at 3.5%, possibly even 4% real GDP, sustainable growth, you know, the calculus is going to change on the election in 2018 and 2020 as well.
Okay. Yeah, Dan, what do you think? I mean, because I don't think he would have won if everyday Americans believed what the media wanted them to believe.
Just go back to George H.W. Bush, wildly popular at the end of the first Iraq War, and then lost because of the economy. The media are put all their chips on people hating Trump. and none of their chips on reality, which right now reality is playing all across the board for Trump and for the GOP. That certainly sets up a real interesting dichotomy if it continues all the way to the election.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that the Democrats ought to remember, the old adage, Americans want something to vote for, not against. Dan, David, good to see you guys. Thank you so much.